Hi, all, and thank you for joining us for Lincoln Institute's first installment of the mini series on the latest affordable housing finance issues in the news. I'm Daniel Janzow, and my colleague Riley Meve is here with us today as well. In this short video, we will be discussing the not so recently published Notice of Intent to establish a federal advisory committee on affordable, equitable, and sustainable housing. This notice comes from the Federal Housing Finance Agency, herein called FHFA. The intent to establish this committee shows exciting promise for affordable housing advocates, but since it was published, no progress has been made in months following the notice. All right, before we dive into the new FHFA Federal Advisory Committee, it's important to ask what exactly is a Federal Advisory Committee. Often people call a Federal Advisory Committee a FHFA. FHFA refers to the Federal Advisory Committee Act of 1972, which governs the establishment and operation of federal advisory committees. Advisory committees have played an important role in shaping programs and policies of the federal government since it began, with even George Washington seeking advice during the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. Today, there are an average of 1,000 advisory committees, with more than 60,000 members on issues across the government. Off to you, Riley.
All right, I'm going to give everyone a little bit more background on federal advisory committees. So the Federal Advisory Committee Act of 1972 formally recognized the merits of seeking the advice and assistance of citizens. The goal of the act was to systematize how governments can seek objective public advice and then act promptly on those recommendations. Executive branch departments are responsible for continually reviewing their committee performance and compliance, but the General Services Administration was designated by the President in 1977 to be responsible for monitoring government-wide committee activities, annual reviews, requests from agencies, and a FHFA database, which it all still does today. Federal advisory committees can only be created when they are essential to the performance of a duty or responsibility convened upon the executive branch. Each advisory committee has a committee management officer to oversee the administration of the Act's requirements, and each committee charter expires after 2 years, but after that it can be renewed. I'll pass it back to Daniel to talk about the new FHFA Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Riley. Okay, so FHFA's notice to establish a FHFA. On August 26, 2022, FHFA published a notice of intent to establish a federal advisory committee on affordable, equitable, and sustainable housing. This committee is meant to fulfill a strategic goal of providing access to affordable and stable housing. The committee could be a promising step in the fight for fair and equitable housing, and this announcement parallels other major decisions by FHFA to support civil rights, such as their new requirement that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac must create equitable housing finance plans every 3 years, in addition to their previously mandated duty to serve plans. According to this notice, the new Federal Advisory Committee activities will focus on FHFA's regulated entities, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks, and their respective roles in providing a reliable source of liquidity and funding to support housing finance in single and multifamily housing markets. Committee members' input in meetings will better inform FHFA's policy development, rulemaking, or community and public engagement functions as they relate to affordable, equitable, and sustainable housing. This committee will consist of 20 members in various subfields, including fair lending, single and multifamily lending, servicing, development, or investments, consumer or community advocacy with special emphasis on the low-income housing tax credit market, and academic researchers. The committee will solely be advisory, only offering recommendations to FHFA. Thus, the committee will have no decision-making roles and no access to non-public FHFA information. Okay, and I will pass it back to you, Riley, to talk about what's happened since that.
Well, nothing has happened since. As Daniel hinted at, there was positive reaction to the announcements of the Affordable, Equitable, and Sustainable Housing Committee, but FHFA has been silent about the committee since. Why? The advisory committee's official charter was uploaded to the General Services Administration FHFA database on September 12, 2022, which means the committee is active. This charter provided the same description of the committee as the FHFA Notice of Intent. FHFA has failed to publish the subsequent notice in the Federal Register to solicit applications and nominations for membership on the committee, despite FHFA promising to do so in the original Notice of Intent. The lack of urgency on FHFA's part to get this committee up and running should raise concerns and questions. Stalling the start of the advisory committee is a serious problem because a committee charter only lasts for 2 years before it must be renewed or else it's dissolved. The FHFA's new advisory committee is expected to only meet once a year. As you can see on the timeline, we are already almost halfway through the first year of the new committee and no committee members have been appointed yet. One of the purposes of this webinar today is to push FHFA to prioritize forming the Affordable, Equitable, and Sustainable Housing Advisory Committee. Otherwise, the committee will not be on track for success. And if the committee is not successful at recommending pertinent and clear strategies for increasing affordable, equitable, and sustainable housing during its first 2-year term, the director of the FHFA may not be inclined to renew the committee's charter.
Great, thank you, Riley. Okay, so the last thing we wanted to touch on is how the Underserved Mortgage Markets Coalition fits into our discussion of the new FHFA FACA. The UMMC, which the Lincoln Institute is a member of, seeks to hold Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac accountable and uphold their founding purpose to bring housing finance opportunities to American families not traditionally served by the private market. Ensuring that FHFA, the regulator of Fannie and Freddie, provide American households with affordable, equitable, and sustainable housing opportunities is, of course, a top priority for the UMMC. When FHFA releases its subsequent notice in the Federal Register about the Federal Advisory Committee membership, the Lincoln Institute expects to coordinate with many members of the UMMC to advocate for their membership in the committee. As shown in this image here, the UMMC has over 25 member organizations who are experts and or practitioners in fair single-family and multifamily lending. The UMMC issues public comments regularly on FHFA's request for input to suggest improvements to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's duty to serve plans and their equitable housing finance plans. Having UMMC members serve on FHFA's new advisory committee, however, will offer the UMMC another avenue for providing FHFA recommendations. Likewise, the UMMC will continue to work in smaller groups with the enterprises to help ensure both entities uphold their duty to serve and equitable housing finance goals.
If you too are concerned about the inaction of FHFA in the creation of their new Federal Advisory Committee, please reach out to the email on this slide for further information and questions. And this brings us to the end of our short webinar. We thank you for tuning in.
Thanks.